For the Department of Information and Public Relations and the Premier's Office, I am GIS Information Officer Nadia James Harris. And on this GIS report, Acting Chief Immigration Officer Mrs. Geraldine Ritter Freeman joins me to speak more on immigration matters, specifically some new initiatives that will be coming on stream in a few days. Mrs. Freeman, the role of the Chief Immigration Officer. Can you share with us more on what that role entails and in helping to manage oversight of the department?
Okay. Thank you, Nadia. The Immigration Department, as we know, is normally associated with being a law enforcement agency, and it does exactly that. We help to protect our borders, we regulate exit and entry from the territory, and we also determine who can stay in the territory. Normally, persons come into the territory, they come to visit, they come to work, they come to reside, they come for leisure and business. And so those persons we try to monitor when they come, and we try to give them some sort of structure and direction while they're here. And so essentially my responsibility as the Chief Immigration Officer would be to manage the overall or to lead and manage the overall mandate of the department, which includes processing. We have a processing unit in our main headquarters that deals with things such as renewals, extensions, and pretty much allowing persons to regularize their status here in the territory. Of course, you know, we have 6 official border ports of entry, that is, and we have our immigration officers stationed at each port of entry, and they, of course, as you know, come when visitors or travelers come into the territory, whether it's via sea or air, they are processed at the ports of entry. We also have surveillance, where our surveillance officers are responsible for research and investigation of persons, not only who are here in the territory, but who are seeking to come, whether to visit or to work. And so it's a very huge mandate that the department has. But I think I want to say at this juncture, in terms of my role personally, I've been the desk officer in the Premier's office responsible for immigration, and so I've been able to work along with the Department of Immigration coincidentally for the past 2 years. And in that role, I've been able to work with the Chief Immigration Officer and the team at Immigration to be able to shape and formulate policy. And of course, some of those initiatives we're going to speak a little bit more about in the program. But I'm excited to be here. I think I have a grasp of the mandate of the department. I think I have a grasp of some of the challenges that the department faces, as well as some of the strengths of the department that don't really get discussed. And so hopefully we can have more opportunities to discuss the strengths of the immigration department and the team that we have here.
In relation to the mandate of the immigration department and fulfilling it, what is your vision for carrying the department forward, especially within the second half of the year, and achieving some of the initiatives and plans that are outlined for the department?
Okay. Well, certainly having just been 1 week on the job, my intention is to work along with the immigration team and to develop some key program strategies. As the desk officer, as I mentioned before, I've been privileged to work with the 2 former chief immigration officers. And so some of the strategies that have been developed, I've been able to think about as I make this transition into this role. There's 16 program strategies, and in the essence of time, I will just highlight a few of those strategies. One of the immediate things that we want to do is we want to look at strengthening our recruitment, retention, and succession planning strategy. We want to take a fresh look at the organization, make an assessment of where we are, and determine our goals and our objectives, and look at our recruitment, retention, and recruitment strategy to see how we can fulfill that mandate. As you know, we've had a number of studies recently that deals with reform of immigration and labor. Again, as the desk officer in the Premier's office, I had been privileged to serve on some of those committees, and so I understand some of the recommendations that are coming out of some of those studies, and it will be my responsibility now as the Chief Immigration Officer to implement some of those recommendations and to work along with the public and the staff here at Immigration to see that those things come to fruition. We have to streamline a number of our processes and procedures and make them a little bit more efficient. And that's one of the things that has been brought to my attention and the committee's attention. We want to make, for example, where we have processes in labor, immigration, customs, we want to streamline. You will recall recently where we had the amalgamation of the entry cards and the custom declaration cards.
Yes.
Just for an example, streamlining those processes and making it a little bit more friendly, business friendly and user friendly for all persons coming to the Virgin Islands. And that's just one such initiative, but there are a number of other initiatives that we're moving towards that will try to streamline our procedures and our processes to make it easier and friendlier for persons who are seeking to be here.
As part of the whole streamlining initiative of your processes, we know that the BVI visa exemption program is slated to come online in a few days. Mm-hmm. And this is where nationals of countries that would normally need a BVI visa, they would be exempt once they have a UK, US, or Canadian visa. Mm-hmm. Can you remind the public about the rationale for this policy and how the process is expected to work?
Okay. Just for some background information, this initiative was in fact one of the recommendations that was discussed and came out as a result of the McKinsey study. And the subcommittees that had been established as a result of those recommendations as government seeks to implement the recommendations. And one of the things that we recognize is that in terms of our local visa policy, there are a number of countries that are required to have a visa to come to the Virgin Islands. In doing so, they have to go through a process where perhaps they have to get the background checks, etc., and all that is required for that. We thought that it would further facilitate or attract the business environment, the investment environment, if we were to engage in a policy that sought to utilize an existing policy, which is the use of persons who have the US, UK, and Canada visa. Essentially, those persons would have gone through a process that we are satisfied would be able to not replace, but to be able to facilitate those persons coming to the Virgin Islands. Now, it's not a broad blanket. It's just for those countries that required a visa to come to the BVI. So now we're talking about those persons who have a US, UK, and Canada visa. They will be allowed to come to the Virgin Islands on the basis that they have those visas. Those visas would have had to have been 6 months old, and the visits would have had to be for a period of 6 months.
What are some of the countries that would ordinarily require a BVI visa, and where can a full list of these countries be obtained?
Okay, there are a number of countries that require a BVI visa. We have countries such as Afghanistan, Cambodia, some of the African countries, Congo. We also have Lebanon, Libya. Closer to home, we have countries like Jamaica and Guyana. We also have Haiti and the Philippines. They have to have visas. Somalia. It's a long list, and the list can be, you can get the list from the passport office, or you can get it from the Department of Immigration or the Deputy Governor's office. Either of those offices will be able to supply you with the extensive list of countries that require BVI visas.
September is also the start of another initiative, the changes to the immigration regulations and policies, where persons who ordinarily would have had to leave the island, leave the territory if they were changing or transitioning through jobs, they can now stay. If they've lived here for about 5 years, they can now seek permission from the chief immigration officer to reside in the territory, remain in the territory until their work permit process has been sorted out. Can you tell us more about that policy? I know we've spoken about it before, but we just want to remind our listeners it's September 1st in a few days, and I know that there are some persons who would be quite interested in hearing about this.
Yes, this particular policy have received quite a stir, and persons, I think, some people I think have an appreciation of why we established this policy, but just to remind the general public, there was in terms of the Immigration and Passport Ordinance, it says if you're changing jobs or you're changing status, essentially what you would have to exit the country and you'd have to return with a new status. And in those cases, or if you're residing in the territory and you want to now seek employment in the territory, again, that is a change of status. So the policy was to ask persons to exit the territory and to return on their new status. With this new policy that we've established that we're going to force on September 1, essentially the existing policy remains for persons who have been here for under 5 years. Persons who have been here for 5 years and more, they would not have to leave the territory. They'll be allowed to stay in the territory. They'll be granted a permit while seeking employment. However, it will cost them $250, a minimal fee of $250. When you think about the costs for persons to exit the country, establish themselves somewhere, to return, in some cases leaving property and family behind, we thought that this policy would have definitely been one that would that those persons who have had that experience would find very beneficial. And so we thought it was a good policy, and I still think it's a great policy. I think it's important to note also that the persons who are residing and seeking to work, you would have had to be in the territory, residing in the territory for at least 3 years in order to do so. And it's important that people recognize that this is, and there's a cost of $250 for those persons as well. We think that these policies will help to streamline the function of the department and how we go about doing business. It discourages certain behaviors that we've identified, trends that we're seeing being developed, adverse trends that we're seeing being developed that we want to curtail, and we want to minimize some of those things. In the industry, we call it flip-flopping, changing jobs, just because, right? We want to emphasize that when you're coming to the territory and you're coming to either work, to visit, or for a particular cause, that you remain with that particular cause and that you don't seek the work. What's happening is we find that people, for example, would come to the territory as a visitor, and then they would decide they want to work. And those are the kind of things within a very short period of time. Certainly, if you're here for an extensive period of time, we could understand that circumstances can change and so forth. But we'll be looking at it on a case-by-case basis. Of course, there's always exceptional circumstances where the chief immigration officer will be at liberty to look at those cases on a case-by-case basis and to determine whether or not persons will be able to benefit from this policy and be given extensions accordingly, or be allowed to stay in the territory while they seek employment. So those are things I think that we're going to learn more about. Hopefully with your support, we can speak more about it. We can field more questions from the community about it and be able to expound and have a clear policy that everyone understands and appreciates.
As part of the policy, Mrs. Freeman, and of course, we are open to making sure that we spread the word. How long is each permit valid for? Is it that the permit, once you can reside, you can stay here, the change and everything? When persons apply for this, how long is it valid?
Okay, when you're changing, when you've lost your job or you're changing jobs and you're issued a permit to stay, you're granted a permit to stay, that permit is effective for only 90 days. Okay, so you have 90 days of which you are to seek employment. Once those 90 days are up, you will then need to seek an extension from the Department of Immigration or seek permission from the Chief Immigration Officer. And on the basis of the circumstances, it will be determined whether a further extension can be granted. But it's important that the public appreciates that the initial permit is for a period of 90 days.
Mrs. Freeman, it's been a pleasure chatting with you about this. And do you have any closing thoughts that you'd like to leave with the public regarding the services and work of the Immigration Department?
Yes. Well, thank you again, Nadia, for the opportunity. As stated earlier on in the interview, this is just my 5th day on the job, but to re-emphasize the fact that I have been working with the Department of Immigration for the past 2 years on a number of initiatives, namely those that we've just discussed, the amalgamation of the immigration and customs forms, the visa exemption program, as well as the amendments to the immigration ordinance that allows persons to stay when they're changing jobs or changing their status. So I am keen on working along with the great team here at the Department of Immigration. I think what's unique about the Department of Immigration is that you have skilled workers, you have workers who have an enormous amount of experience. We have a number of employees that have worked in the department for over 20 plus years. And so we wanted to bridge the gap between those seasoned officers and our new officers and make sure that the department that we are building is comparable to any other department anywhere else, and that our policies are also comparative to any other country that we're looking at. And so it's important that we modernize. We're looking at our systems at the ports, our electronic systems, and we're hoping that we can give officers the right supplies, the right equipment that they need in order for them to carry out their jobs. Because one of the things I really want to emphasize before we close is, even though we are here to protect and we look at immigration as a law enforcement agency, and that it is, I think what's important to note is that immigration policy also amounts to economic policy. And we haven't spent a lot of time on that, Nadia, but hopefully in the future we can sit down and talk more about how what we do in immigration as a law enforcement agency impacts the economy. And I think that's where we have all this discussion taking place with regards to reforming the immigration department and making sure that it's modernized and that it's in keeping with what the trends that are taking place, not just regionally, but internationally. And again, looking at how what we do and how we do it and how it impacts the economy on a whole in the territory is something that I think we can have a further discussion about, and something that the community will get a greater appreciation when we're talking about immigration, not just law enforcement. We're here to protect, but we're also here to serve.
Mrs. Freeman, we look forward to having those further discussions and spreading the Immigration Matters message.
Amen.
For the Department of Information and Public Relations and the Premier's Office, I've been your host on this GIS report, Nadia James Harris, and with me has been the Acting Chief Immigration Officer, Mrs. Geraldine Ritter Freeman, and we have been discussing some of the new policies that are coming on stream at the Immigration Department. To keep up with the latest government news and find out more about what's happening, remember to visit our website at bvi.gov.bg and follow us on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter at BVI Government.